everyone. Welcome to episode 235 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we have thanks to Sue for increasing her patronage over on Patreon. Thank you so much, Sue. We appreciate it.
We're happy to have you.
Let's jump in. Emily, what are you currently reading?
Well, speaking of Sue and her Big Book Summer Reading Challenge, which started on May 23rd, the Friday of Memorial Day weekend, and stretches through Labor Day, which is September 1st this year. We will put links into the show notes about Big Book Summer. I know a lot of you have been reading along with Sue for years now, and she has a co-pilot this year, Melinda, over a Web of Stories, and they have both done booktube videos explaining the challenge, so we will put links for all of that. We'll put a link to Sue's blog where she talks about the challenge. I jumped off right away and started with The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. This book comes in just over 400 pages, which is what qualifies as a big book. It's 416 pages. And it starts off with a bang, not literally, but just a sentence that catches your attention. Hai is 19 years old, and he's standing on a bridge about to attempt suicide when he is stopped by a woman named Grazina, who's an elderly woman walking down the street. And it takes place in East Gladness, Connecticut, which is not a real town, but is supposed to represent East Hartford, which is where Ocean grew up. I've listened to numerous interviews with him, and this book is semi-autobiographical. So he is reflecting a lot on his childhood growing up as a refugee from Vietnam. He and his mother came when he was quite young. So I am both reading it and listening to it. It's narrated by James Aaron O, who's doing a fantastic job. And it is definitely one of those novels that's making me want to put everything else aside and ignore family and friends and work, etc. So I highly recommend it. Again, it's called The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong.
Oh, nice. I look forward to that one. I've tried some of his poetry. I haven't read his prose yet. And I know I missed an event. He was at R.J. Julia in Madison, I think on the day that I left Connecticut.
Yeah. I've actually had a hard time with his poetry, but his novel, you can definitely tell he's a poet. I mean, he's so particular with words. And the way he describes things, you can tell he just notices details. And every sentence is amazing. It really is. Yes. But accessible. I'm finding this novel very accessible.
Well, I'm listening to an audiobook, Still Writing, The Perils and Pleasures of a Creative Life by Dani Shapiro. And it is not a big book. I looked at the page count on this one. It's 230 pages. So the audio, I didn't even write down how long the audio is because I'm in it, but I think it might be about 6 hours. Enjoying it very much. I really like her voice. While I was listening yesterday in the car, I was thinking like, this is an audiobook that I could eventually use to fall asleep to.
Oh, interesting.
Because she has such a lovely voice. It's warm. At least so far, there's no huge differences in the tone she uses or volume. And I'm enjoying it very much.
Dani Shapiro will be your nighttime companion. Pema Chodron is mine.
Well, yeah, she might kick Cal Newport off of that. He'd been my fall asleep to guy for a while.
Well, I'm still reading Feeding Ghosts by Tessa Holes. This is a graphic memoir, the one that just won the Pulitzer Prize. I'm doing it very slowly. It's overdue at the library. I'm sorry to whoever is waiting for it. I'm not giving it back until I'm done. It's one of those, it's told in several parts. I can't remember how many parts, but I'm sitting down and committing to one part each time. And she's telling the story of herself and her mother and her grandmother. So 3 generations of Chinese women. And it's very ghosty, like the background of the images, which is all black and white, have, as Chris pointed out when she saw it, kind of looks like a scream, like a ghost screaming. And it is the ghosts of the past and also the ghosts of mental illness are really what the metaphor for that is. It's very poignant. Tessa Holes taught herself to draw in order to do this. It took 10 years for her to write this book. And so I feel like I want to honor all the work she did by really taking my time with it. I highly recommend it. Chris and I have talked about how graphic novels are kind of tricky for us because we're so word centric. So I'm looking at the images before I start the page, reading it, and then looking at the images again and then moving on, which is why it's taking me so long to get through, but really enjoying it. Again, it's called Feeding Ghosts, a graphic memoir by Tessa Holes.
So, well, I'm reading a short book, very short. I'm holding it up for Emily to see. It's so thin, it doesn't even have text on the spine. How big is this? It is 62 pages long. And the title is These Two Were Here, Louise Homer and Willa Cather. This is by Elizabeth Moorhead. It was published by the University of Pittsburgh Press and published in 1950. So, I'm reading this for my Willa Cather slight obsession. And I read the introduction and then the Cather part. I will read the Louise Homer part next. But Elizabeth Moorhead was a woman of a certain class who didn't have to work, apparently. And during the Great Depression, when things tanked, her capital was hit a bit. So she decided to leave the home that she had grown up in and move to Italy. So she's in Italy, I guess, in the 20s and 30s as the rise of fascism starts with Mussolini there, who predated Hitler a little bit, but then, Hitler eclipsed him in terms of being the strong man. What was fascinating is that several times she mentions how fascist her fellow Americans were becoming. I was like, well, here we are again with this. So she's in Italy, but she knew Willa Cather in Pittsburgh, where I happen to be sitting right now. I am in Pittsburgh. On my journey back from Illinois to Connecticut, I stopped in Pittsburgh in part to see the Carnegie Library, which I'll talk about later. And I brought this book along with me, which I purchased pretty recently. I bought it through a rare book dealer. It's just a small remembrance of these two women that she knew in Pittsburgh and the lives that they lived that were kind of simple and dedicated to ideas rather than accumulation of materials. Because what's really interesting, I've had this whole 1920s thing going unintentionally right now. So she says at one point about the 1920s, after the financial orgy of the 20s, gambling on the stock market, buying and selling, lavish spending of unearned wealth, the crash came and we toppled down headlong from our peak of prosperity into the pit of the Great Depression. Long bread lines stretched in front of soup kitchens. Old men sold apples on the street corners. So the 1920s is, and I'll talk more about the 1920s in a subsequent read that I did. But this was a really interesting read to read about somebody who knew Willa Cather here in Pittsburgh. They met each other too when Cather moved to New York. They connected there a couple times. So she has a view of Cather as being very committed to her art. And as her friend Isabel McClung, Cather was in Pittsburgh for like 9 years. And I think for 4 or 5 of those, she lived with a woman named Isabel McClung at their mansion. At the father's house, he was a judge. And that's where Elizabeth Moorhead met Cather after writing her a fan letter. She read Cather's story, Paul's Case, which really excited her because she was from Pittsburgh, and wrote her a fan letter, and Cather invited her to tea. And that's how they met.
Oh.
Yeah. And so she mentions how Isabel really protected Cather's time and space to be able to write. And how can you not love somebody who does that for you, right?
No kidding.
Yeah. So again, these two were here, Louise Homer and Willa Cather by Elizabeth Moorhead.
Very cool. I'm reading Love is a Pink Cake, Irresistible Bakes for Morning, Noon, and Night by Claire Patak. I had never heard of this book, but a listener reached out and said, I can't remember if she said she was listening to Stanley Tucci or she read Stanley Tucci's memoir, because I know he has one out, but that he mentioned this book and she thought of me, which thank you so much. That is so lovely and so kind. So, of course, I immediately went to the library and got myself a copy. I'm going to show it to Chris. It has a really pretty cover. It's an unusual cover, so I couldn't tell if this was a memoir or if this was a cookbook, and it is indeed a cookbook. What's interesting is Claire Patak, who trained at Chez Panisse in California with Alice Waters, now lives in London, and she owns her own bakery called Violet. This, to me, as soon as I read that about her, I'm like, oh, yeah, this is something that they would publish that's London-centric, because in Europe, they're not so concerned with covers of cookbooks having big picture of food or the author's face on it. I know American cookbook covers are very different. But the reference, Love is a Pink Cake, is to Andy Warhol's set of prints about love that he wrote many, many, many years ago, back in the 50s, I believe. I've gotten through the introduction. The way that the pages are designed is really different. I'm showing it to Chris. It just doesn't look like a classic cookbook. It's very small font and 2 columns, and her writing, like her voice is very familiar. I really enjoy it. And she's talking about, even though she has this famous bakery in London that has all sorts of beautiful cakes, that her daughter tells her that anything her mom bakes for her at home tastes so much better, because it is different when you bake for somebody directly at home. There's really beautiful photographs. A lot of the photographs are pictures of the farmers where she gets her fruits and vegetables. And I can't wait to choose something to cook. I haven't decided yet because everything looks so great. It is, as it suggests in the title, Morning, Noon, and Night. It is separated into those. And it also has some savory recipes. They're not all just sweet. So I might start, I think I saw a savory cobbler, and I love cobbler. So I might start with that recipe. More to come. Love is a Pink Cake, Irresistible Bakes for Morning, Noon, and Night, from the founder of Violet Bakery by Claire Patak. Thank you so much for letting me know about this book.
Man, now I'm hungry. I haven't had breakfast yet this morning, and
oh no.
I'm gonna have to find a bakery when we're at the road.
I'll look one up for you. Pittsburgh. Too bad we didn't crowdsource before you went. Chris, what did you just read?
Well, I finished Renegade Girls, a queer tale of romance and rabble-rousing. This was written by Nora Neus and illustrated by Julie Robine. And I enjoyed it. It was a good story. It's a historical fantasy fiction, I would say. Somebody recently talked about, well, I think it was Sarah Waters talking about her own writing of 19th century Victorian lesbian themed novels, that they are like historical fantasy by representing queer women who are out or verbally out within the story is really nice, you know, to see situated there. There's other diversity here too. There's African American characters. It's a good story. It is about a woman who wants to be a writer, a journalist who poses as a stunt girl. She already has a society column that she's been writing for the newspaper, and she wants to become a stunt girl and expose some of the horrors of what happens in clothing factories. And she's good friends with a servant in her home, an Italian girl, young woman, I should say. They grew up together. And this young woman who's a servant is also taking care of her parents, and she also works in a clothing factory. So the writer gets to go along with her and see the conditions and assumes a name and starts writing these stunt girl stories. And of course, she's making much better money doing this. And she meets a woman who is a photographer, and they fall in love. And she convinces her to come and secretly photograph some of these conditions, because when the first stunt girl piece goes out about this factory, the company sues her and the paper for libel, saying, this is not true. We take good care of our employees, blah, blah, blah. So she has the idea of incorporating photography, which was a new thing for newspapers at this time, to not just have illustrations, but actual photographs to have evidence of what is actually going on. So these three women form a really good group going after the conditions, trying to help the women and some men who are working there, and also children. You know, kids who are like 6 and 7 are working in this factory. And there's a tie-in with her family. The writer is actually from Chicago, but she's living in New York with her aunt and uncle to try and get more cultured. And her family wants her to find a husband. And there's the family aspect of it too, which eventually ties into the factory situation. And this is a short graphic novel. Unlike the Ghost one that Emily is reading, this is one that you could certainly read in a day or two. And it's color as opposed to black and white.
I know. It just occurred to me I should look at, the Ghost one falls just under a big book summer read. It's 388 pages, but it is long.
Yeah. Well, and that book is oversized too. So if it were this format, it would definitely be over 400 pages. So again, that's Renegade Girls, A Queer Tale of Romance and Rabble-Rousing by Nora, Neus, and Julie Robine.
I finished The Good House by Tananarive Due. This is our Q2 read-along. We're going to have a Zoom discussion of this on June 8th, just around the corner. Reminder to email us at bookcougars@gmail.com if you'd like to join the conversation. I'm not going to talk about it because we are going to talk about it at length on the next episode. I will say it's one of those books I got to the end, and I did listen to the audiobook as well. It's narrated by Robin Miles. If it wasn't over 600 pages, I would go back to the beginning and start over. It's one of those books that I was like, I don't really think I know what happened. So I'm actually really excited to have the conversation. I mean, I'm always excited to have the conversation with our listeners and with you. But in this one in particular, I'm like, okay, I really need people to help me with this one. So again, it's called The Good House. And we do have a Goodreads discussion thread as well, which I need to pipe in on. I've been really bad about that, and see what people are saying over there as well. And all those links are in the show notes.
Yeah, I need to get back with Goodreads too. It's been the end of the semester and then traveling and stuff, but I look forward to digging into that again. So I finished an audiobook on the way from Connecticut to, I stopped in Ohio on the way here, and I listened to this one in one day. It was 10 hours and 29 minutes, and I drove 10 hours and 33 minutes the first day. So it's perfect.
The question is, did you take your foot off the pedal to make sure that you matched, or was it really a good match? Because we all know how we readers/listeners will extend a trip sometimes to get through our audiobook.
You know, that is a good question. I wonder if I listened to it maybe a little bit in the hotel room that night. I don't remember now. Anyway, it is a big book. It would qualify as a big book if anybody's interested. It's 432 pages in book format. The title is A Fever in the Heartland, The Ku Klux Klan's Plot to Take Over America, and the Woman Who Stopped Them. This is by Timothy Egan, and I do not remember how it came on my radar, but I thought, well, that sounds like a good audiobook, and some friends had good positive things to say about it. And it is basically about the KKK's rise in the 1920s, particularly in Indiana. And there's a guy named D.C. Stevenson who he grew up dirt poor, not in Indiana, but he eventually makes his way to Indiana. And within like 2 years of arriving, he becomes the Grand Dragon of Indiana. He's ruthless, violent, brutal. He likes to bite women when they're having sex. He was a real messed up man, I think. And there's a woman named Madge Oberholtz who makes the mistake of leaning in to help get his support to preserve her job, which was on the cutting block. And she basically dies for it. I'm not sure how much of a spoiler that is. You know, the title I thought is a tad bit misleading. The Woman Who Stopped Them. I mean, that title to me makes it think like she was actively doing something to stop them. And I think the best way to equate it would be like to say that Madge Oberholtz is to Stevenson what taxes were to Capone in some ways. So he does attack her brutally, and she is eventually left in her parents' home where they find her and they try to nurse her. And Stevenson's guys basically say she was in a car accident. Long story short, she is I think like 29 days. She is on her, quote, deathbed, and poison is involved as well. But one of the things is, antibiotics were not developed until the later 20s, or was it even the 30s maybe? So having somebody bite you and all that bacteria that's in a human mouth, it's not a good situation. So he eventually does go to prison, which shocks everybody because the KKK was so much in control. And that's kind of the bulk of the book, is how much control this man, Stevenson, was able to create in Indiana. Basically, he said he was above the law and he could get away with anything. And he did many times. He controlled the judges, he controlled the politicians, he controlled the local everything. And one of the points that Egan makes at the very end I thought was interesting about why did the Ku Klux Klan's popularity go down so quickly in the 1930s when it had been such a powerhouse in the 20s. Like there were millions of supporters all over the country. It was a huge organization, huge support. And one of the thoughts he has is maybe they accomplished their mission by eliminating severely the amount of immigrants that were coming into the country, which was, they were anti-immigrant, as most fascist organizations are. So I thought that was a really good question, because I think some of the stories I've heard, it's like people understood finally that it was wrong to discriminate and murder people for being who they are. And I think there's a lot of financial and also political understanding to be looked into about why it fell.
But I mean, it didn't go away.
It did not go away. No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But it was no longer such a huge organization. They had newspapers. They marched in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. Like, it was the biggest demonstration ever. And even people like Mencken, who was a big critic at the time, a cultural critic, literary critic, was like, this was the most, amazing demonstration ever.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean positive,
right.
Although initially you think that sounds positive. But yeah, they were infiltrated everywhere. And there were a lot of senators who were openly KKK or not, mm-hmm. and then open to blackmail and things like that, I suppose. But all around the country, there were millions of supporters, like active members. And that's how this guy Stevenson got so wealthy, was because there was membership dues when you became a member. So this is just not like people saying, I support this discriminatory organization. It was people who were paying to become paying
right.
members. There was a woman's arm of this organization. There are also Klan kitties for children, another model for Hitler's Nazis over in Germany then later in the 30s and 40s. So it was a really fast read, a really fast listen, I should say. It made those miles just fly by, really. And he reads it himself. Egan reads it himself. And, he's not the greatest reader, but I think him reading it made it better because, he does voices and you can hear like his sarcasm and dripping with arrogance sometimes when he's quoting these people. I really enjoyed it as an audiobook. Again, that's A Fever in the Heartland, The Ku Klux Klan's Plot to Take Over America and the Woman Who Stopped Them by Timothy Egan. And I gotta say, Emily, so this is about Indiana, which I wasn't thinking about when I chose it to listen to as my audiobook.
When you're driving that way.
I'm driving through Indiana. Yeah. And there's one point where I got rerouted around an accident and I'm driving through Valparaiso.
Oh, yeah. I've been there.
And there's a plot point in here where Valparaiso College University was struggling. It was going to close. The KKK actually was trying to buy it to become a school for KKK ideology, but that didn't work out. But can you, and I'm like, gosh, here I am in Valparaiso, which, I've been through before, but I was like, wow, talk about one of those synchronicities, right?
Yeah. So interesting. Well, I mean, so great too, to have an audiobook that just makes those miles go, because when you're driving from here to Chicago or Ohio, some of it is beautiful and hilly and interesting, and some of it is just long and flat.
Oh, yeah. Well,
so
and I had
really
to drive the interstate. I didn't have the luxury of, well, for the most part, I was on the Lincoln Highway for a little bit, but I just had to jam and get there. And when I have time, I love to get off the interstate and meander on the back roads. But
yeah, the difference between you and me, I'm like, put in the fastest route and put your pedal to the metal. Well, I read A Dog in Georgia by Lauren Grodstein. This releases on August 5th, so it's a new release. Thank you to Algonquin for sending us an early copy, both an e-copy and a physical copy. This is about Amy, who had a very brief modeling career in New York City and then ended up getting into the food world and working as a chef. But where the novel picks up, she's now married to Judd, who's a restaurant owner. She became a stepmom to a boy named Ferry, who's now in college. So she's kind of experiencing that empty nest situation. Her husband, Judd, has had many infidelities, and she's considered leaving him many times, but has not. And they are having a current crisis around that. She has gotten lost in YouTube, as so many of us have, and has fallen in love with this dog named Angel, who's in Georgia, not Georgia in the United States, but the Republic of Georgia. And he has gone missing. The dog has gone missing. Mm. And the dog was well known for living in a doghouse near a local elementary school and would help ferry the kids back and forth, across the street to the school. So Amy has been sending donations to this woman named Irene, who's the principal of that local elementary school, to help support stray dogs and help support Angel. And she throws caution to the wind and gets in touch with Irene and buys a plane ticket and heads to Georgia. And she is in Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, and moves in with Irene and starts to learn about the culture there. And the food that she talks about is amazing. I'm very interested in cooking some of the food she talked about, or getting a cookbook at least to learn more about it. But it really starts to become about her notion that she was going to kind of come and save the day and find this dog who's gone missing. She brought a drone, and she was, do drone searches and find this dog and kind of be the woman in shining armor that arrives, and starts to learn more about the culture there and what's happening, including their own revolution that's going on as Putin has been creating some crisis in Georgia, and the Russians in general. So it ended up being a much more rich book. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. The title of it caught my eye, even though I'm not known as a dog person in my family. But I was like, a dog in Georgia? What could this possibly be about? And Lauren Grodstein is a great writer. You're in good hands with her. I really enjoyed it. It was unexpected. It was about a woman doing some soul searching as she's become an empty nester and has lost her way about what's important to her in her own life. Out on August 5th, A Dog in Georgia by Lauren Grodstein.
I have another audio book that I listened to the next day of the drive, and that was The Great Gatsby at 100. This is by Sheila Lemming, who's a professor, and this is an Audible-only book that was done in partnership with the Great Courses. It's 2 hours, 48 minutes, and I really enjoyed it. Longtime listeners know I've had a mixed relationship with The Great Gatsby. I really admire it now. That wasn't always the case, but I thought, this sounds really good. Short. I did the preview. I liked her voice. So this is a set of essays about The Great Gatsby. It's 100 years old now. She discusses economics, and these are different chapters. Okay. So economics, class, gender, sex, fashion, and jazz in relation to The Great Gatsby. And it was really fascinating because, for one, we have this idea of The Great Gatsby, the flappers and the glamour, and I suppose the gangsters, which are also glamorized. But she really focuses on how Nick is there in New York City to learn how to get into the financial industry that's going on now, particularly bonds. There were enormous amounts of bond fraud during this period, and people getting wealthy from selling bonds, legally and illegally, right? So that was interesting to me to hear about what was going on from that KKK book, A Fever in the Heartland, And then now with the Gatsby being set in the 20s as well, it was a nice pairing of two books that I didn't anticipate at all to give me a different perspective.
The Willa Cather book also, because the one thing you said about that one that I thought was so interesting is how they referred to the stock market as gambling. And
Absolutely.
I'm the only person I know who refers to the stock market as gambling. You know, I always say it's legal gambling.
Well, yeah, it's for the most part, depending on how you do it, right?
Yes.
And what your tolerance level is,
Yes.
you know, if you are willing to take big risks or if you're not much of a risk taker. But yeah, it's legal and hopefully you're not getting scammed by a financial advisor, which that still happens a lot today, as we know. So, right. Yeah. All of them, these three books went really well together. Well, and I just read the Willa Cather one like this morning. But yeah, it's interesting how a time period, and I've never really thought a ton about the 1920s, but it's going to be interesting because this upcoming conference I'm going to is going to be focusing around a book that was published in 1925. So, you know, here we are in the 20s for a while.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy this very much. You know, it's short, so I'm sorry, though, that it's only available on Audible. This is one that I think would be really enjoyable for a lot of people to listen to. You definitely want to read The Great Gatsby first, though, because, of course, there are a lot of spoilers because she's explaining these different areas and how they're represented in the book.
Right.
Yeah. So again, that was The Great Gatsby at 100 by Sheila Lemming. So another audiobook, surprise, surprise, is The Writing Life by Annie Dillard. This is narrated by Tavia Gilbert. It's 2 hours and 37 minutes. I really despised the first half hour of this audiobook, but I thought, oh, just keep listening, you know. And I'm glad I did because there are some nuggets in here for sure. I didn't always appreciate the analogies and metaphors that Annie Dillard was using. I think the narrator just did not appeal to me. I mean, you could tell it was somebody who was not emotionally attached to the content. You know, there was a disconnect there. So it felt inauthentic and the timing was just off at moments. But some of the good advice, like two things that have stuck in my mind is to not hold back when you're writing. You know, like don't save something for later or for another book or another project. Like get it all out now. Like just let it all rip. Because that's something that I do even like with my blog. I'll be like, oh, no, that could be 2 posts, you know, or, oh, maybe I'll do that. It's like, no, just get it out, right? Put it out there. You can always expand on something later.
It's not self-editing as you're writing. It's more just like trying to compartmentalize your ideas is what she's saying. Like just write it all. Right.
Yeah, stop yourself from saying this could be a separate piece or I'm going to save this because it's really good and it could go with this other project or, ooh, maybe I'll make that into a book of its own. Like just let it all out, you know, like don't stop yourself because it's all part of the creative process. And then she also says, do not edit as you're going along. Don't try to perfect as you're writing because that will kind of inhibit you from really exploring the imagination of whatever the piece is leading you towards. So those kind of go together. And then the other thing I thought was really relevant to some of the conversations we've had recently about a writer needs to remove the price tag of what they paid to write what they've written. Like they don't need to include that in their book. And it's kind of related to like what we were talking about with Alyssa Altman. And it's also related to Maura Casey, you know, talking about scenes in their memoirs that didn't need to be in the book. It was more about them than the story. It wasn't in service to the story. And as Annie Dillard says, like, how many books have we read where there's something in there that doesn't need to be in there? She says it's not pertinent to know what it cost the writer personally. And she says writers need to have the courage to cut the umbilical cord.
Wow, that's good.
And I thought, wow, that was really a different way of looking at it, that they are making choices and taking those parts out that really matter to you, but that don't really serve the story or make sense to the writer or that bog down the reader,
right.
I should say,
Yeah.
you know. as in like, what the, what's the point here?
Yeah.
Which I kind of felt a little bit about Annie Dillard's writing itself.
Ironically.
Some of the stories she was telling. But she always does bring it back to the writing. But I just think there were 2 or 3 analogies that just I thought were a little bit too over the top.
Yeah, like you've already made your point. You don't need to do this sort of thing.
Well, or it's just too extreme. Like there's one point where she tells a story about an alligator wrestler who is wrestling an alligator for money. And the alligator and the wrestler go down and they never come back up. There's just bloody bubbles that come up. And that writing is like being an alligator wrestler. I was like, oh, come on. That's a bit too much. And it
Wrestling
took him like
those
a week.
words.
It took him a week to find all the body parts of this poor guy.
God. Yeah.
I just thought that's a bit much,
Yeah.
Annie. But, I think reading it might be a better experience, especially now that I know the gist of the book. It might be a very different experience to go and read it myself.
Yeah.
Without a narrator that I didn't appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. The narrator makes a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, that's The Writing Life by Annie Dillard.
Well, we also read a short story from our book, The Penguin Book of Ghost Stories, from Elizabeth Gaskill to Ambrose Bierce, that we are reading throughout our year of reading ghost stories. And the most current one was a very short story, especially compared to the one that we read last week. And this is called The Ghost in the Cap'n Brown House by Harriet Beecher Stowe, a Connecticut author.
Yeah, Connecticut writer. This one came out in 1871 in London and then 1872 in Boston as part of her longer collection. And there is a lot of dialect in this story. I got to the hotel room. I had my e-reader with me and I plopped down and I was going to read it. And I was like, oh, dear. So I don't know if I could deal with her dialect because she has that, like Uncle Tom's Cabin has a lot of dialect. It made me realize like, oh, this is probably one reason that she's not read that much anymore. It's not just that there's some sentimentality that people don't appreciate anymore, but it's also that dialect. So I actually got the audiobook. I had a credit on Libro and I just got it. So I listened to it, which I appreciated more. I mean, I also maybe overdo the dialect in my head when I'm reading it. And the narrator did a really nice job of like smoothing it out and feeling like it was more of a true accent.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually read this one first this time.
Oh, wow.
Which is interesting. Yeah. And that the first thing I have in my notes is dialect with a big exclamation point. So it's so funny. And then I did listen to it and I thought the same thing. Like, oh, it really is interesting to hear it. It like it doesn't even stand out in the audio, I feel like, at all. Yeah.
So what did you think of it as a ghost story?
I mean, I keep wanting to be scared, and this is definitely not scary, but it was a really interesting take on the ghost story. I think that's how I would describe this one. Does that make sense when I say that?
Yeah. So do you want to tell the listeners what it's about?
Sure. Well, it's another story that's being told to us, and the narrator is Sam, and Sam is telling this story of a man, Captain Brown, who had been a seagoing gentleman and made his money and came back to Massachusetts and is living in a small town in a big house and has a housemaid. Is that the way to describe her? How do they describe her? Quasi.
Well, you know what? This story was pre-1808, so she could have been an enslaved woman.
Yes.
She, Quasi, I think was her
name.
Quasia. And then they call her Quasi, I thought at one point. Yeah, she was a black woman who was, the maid of this man. And I think she could have been enslaved.
I think you're right. I mean, the description of her was the most troubling part of the story for me, describing her in a way that we would never describe a black woman today, I don't think.
Or anybody today.
Yes, anybody. I mean, they did give mad props to her cooking skills and also that she was very in charge of the house. Nobody messed with her. She
very in charge. Yeah.
And this woman named Cynthia comes to visit and she's a seamstress and she brings all of her stuff and she's doing a lot of sewing for Captain Brown. And she one morning says, I think I was visited last night by a ghost on the stairway. Mm-hmm. A person in, like something white that whisked past me. And then she decides, this part cracked me up so much, especially being from a small town, that she wasn't going to tell anybody about this except so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. So then word spread, well, there's a shock, that there might be a ghost at Captain Brown's house.
Right. That was so funny.
That was so funny. There's also a lot about whether you're a churchgoer or not a churchgoer. Mm-hmm. And so whether that means you could be visited by a ghost.
Yeah, that was funny. And one thing about Kwasia is that she says at one point, like, oh, the things white people believe or something to that effect about ghosts, which I thought was a funny moment. But yeah, so there's all this speculation then. Is it a real woman? Is it a ghost? I mean, there was that one scene where Cynthia wakes up and she can't move. Mm-hmm. And she sees the white figure and like she's like paralyzed. And that's the big thing in some ghost stories where like you can't move. And it's like, is it that sleep paralysis that happens? Or is it the ghost controlling her? Mm-hmm. There's some unknowns. And then the old sea captain dies. And the big debate becomes whether somebody saw a woman actually leaving the house with Kwasi carrying her stuff to the coach for her, or was it a ghost that somebody saw? And then that's the big debate in town, a debate that has never been solved.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't scary at all.
No. But there were some themes that we've seen before, like they're snowed in. Mm-hmm. So there's that, like being stuck in the house in the snow, right? That's a theme we've heard before. Also, the story being told, by being recounted, I guess is the right way to say it. And also, I loved the very beginning is, do you believe in ghosts? Which is a question that we've also seen asked in these stories as well. So I enjoyed it. I mean, I thought it was a quick read and interesting, and I was glad to be able to listen to the audiobook as well, but I was able to get through it without a problem by just reading it. One thing that I thought was interesting, reminder to people, this is the book that has a lot of notes in the back. And I have gotten in the habit now of reading the notes after, like not letting it interrupt me, because this one had 15. So you could really, in like 6 pages, you could really get distracted by the notes. They also give a little short summary of the author, Harriet Beecher Stowe. And they said, Stowe's interest in spiritualism had its commercial aspects while working on Old Town Folks, which is these collections called Old Town Fireside Stories. So while working on Old Town Folks, she had contemplated writing an article on the planchette, a form of a Ouija board. And remember, we saw that in Shirley Jackson's book, A Haunting on Hill House. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. A little Shirley Jackson nod there. So, yeah. Yeah,
really good. Yeah. And I had the thought, too, like, is this how people deal with what they can't see? Like, I was thinking, like, was this the lover of the sea captain? Was it Kwasi's lover, in the house? And they just made up stories about it? Or was it a ghost?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, ghosts are kind of a nice foil for like, ooh, we were bringing someone into Bop instead, and we were sneaking her out in her little white shawl. Too bad Cynthia saw it.
It was a ghost. It was a ghost, really.
Yeah, so we hope you're reading along with us. There is a Goodreads thread. I saw that Amanda commented, and I'm interested to see what she had to say about it. I didn't read it yet because I thought there might be spoilers. So thank you to everyone who's joining in on Goodreads. We are not going to be reading one next week because we'll be talking about our second quarter read-along on the next episode, on episode 236. So we decided we would skip the short story reads on the episodes where we're doing the read-along. But we should say that the next one, which will be on episode 237, Thrawn Janet by Robert Louis Stevenson. That's an interesting title.
The audiobook player just kept going into the next story, and this one has a Scottish accent, Stevenson. Yeah,
interesting.
So look forward to that. I'm glad I have the audio now, too, because I think, like, oh, maybe I'll listen to some stories on the way home.
I'm enjoying the audiobook. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by
The Baker of Lost Memories by Shirley Russick Wachtel. Readers of Shirley Russick Wachtel's acclaimed A Castle in Brooklyn will be delighted to hear that Shirley's next novel, The Baker of Lost Memories, is now available. This moving story follows Lena, who is growing up in 1960s Brooklyn and aspires to be a baker just like her mother was prior to World War II. Tormented by questions about the sister she never knew, Lena must finally confront a frightening truth. The Baker of Lost Memories pubs today, the day this episode drops, June 3rd. Check the show notes for links. So, Chris, Biblio Adventures, you've been on a serious gallivant. I can't wait to hear some of your stories.
Yeah, so anytime I have a road trip and I have time to do this, I like to look and see what kind of literary things I can stop and see on my way. And this time I looked particularly at libraries. And I found the Brumback Library in Van Wert, Ohio. I was also looking for a place where our friend Linda Johnson, who's our Goodreads librarian, she adds the books that we talk about to that. And she's a good friend from Booktopia. She's known as the mayor of Booktopia because she's such an organizer and people joiner. So it was great to see her. We met at the Brumback Library and then walked to a diner and had lunch. Oh, such a beautiful library. And this one came up on my radar because it is known as being the first county library in the United States that was tax supported. I actually have a book about it here called The County Library. And this book, The County Library, the Pioneer County Library, the Brumback Library of Van Wert County, Ohio, and the County Library Movement in the United States. That's the full title. This is by Sade Brumback Antrim, who was the founder's daughter. So John Stanford Brumback was a wealthy banker in town who put up the money for this library. And this wonderful book that was published in 1914 talks about the history of the library in Van Wert and how the library came to be. And she takes a lot of newspaper clippings to tell the story in some sections. And then there's a lot of statistics and stuff that her husband actually put together in the second part of the book about county libraries in the United States and all of the towns and people it serves. It is a gorgeous library. I will do a blog post about it, but we'll also share some photos on our social media channels. It looks like a small castle, and it's wonderfully maintained on the inside. They're celebrating their 125th. So when I walked in and said hello, everybody's super friendly because most librarians are. And then it's also in the Midwest where people don't mind talking to one another as opposed to New England. Sorry, New England. So one of the librarians said, would you like a tour? I was like, yeah, I would love a tour. She's like, great. She's like, let me just finish this thing and I'll be right with you. And she explained that they are working on having a more formal tour as part of this anniversary celebration that they have coming up. So she walked me through, the major rooms and areas and pointed out their state-of-the-art fire doors that they have, because there's like this one stairwell and it's kind of like a big half circle that comes out of the wall and closes off that whole stairway in this dome shape, which is really cool. I haven't seen that at a library before, but a lot of people there. It was a weekday, and it was great to see a lot of people there using the library and to have that tour. And
had Linda ever been there?
No, she hadn't.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she had not been there before.
We should say Linda's also a retired librarian. She's now the Book Cougars librarian, but she is a retired librarian and still works, I know, for her library book sale and things like that. So yeah. So it's great to see her and fun to see another beautiful library. Nice. Well, I had a Biblio adventure that went unexpectedly. I went to join Rachel and my granddaughter Nina for her very first story time at the Wesleyan R.J. Julia in Middletown. And ironically, they were reading Dear Bookstore by Emily Arrow. And Emily Arrow is somebody that Rachel knew growing up. she was the best friend of one of Rachel's best friends who had started in a different school district than Yellow Springs, which is where Rachel did all of her years of public school. So Rachel knew her and they did social things together. And Emily Arrow is somebody who started a career singing songs to children's books. So she gets in touch with authors and does a lot of singing using her ukulele and has a lot of fun and does story times everywhere across the United States and on YouTube. I will put a link to her YouTube channel. And she just published this book called Dear Bookstore, which is a love letter to bookstores because she spends a lot of time in them. So Emily wasn't going to be at RJ's. It was just RJ's typical story time, which the first thing that happened is we walked in and they had the display and we were there on Saturday morning and it very clearly on the display said Sunday at 11 a.m. So I turned to Rachel and I'm like, Rach, it's Saturday. And she whips out her phone. She's like, Mom, it says Saturday on the thing. And sure enough, we go up to the bookseller and said, hey, you know, what's going on here? Well, it turns out Wesleyan's graduation was on Sunday because the R.J. Julia in Middletown, it also sells a lot of the Wesleyan University's college gear and stuff. So it's kind of considered their bookstore. So they said, yes, it usually is Sunday. It's on Saturday because of Wesleyan's graduation this weekend. But the person who's supposed to read just called and canceled. Aww. So there's all these children walking around and there are these people with like name tags because they must do some thing with alumni. It must be an alumni weekend as well. So what do? I turn to the bookseller. I'm like, I'll read it. And she looked at me. She's like, really? Because the bookstore was packed and you could tell she was panicking. She's like, the bookstore manager's on her way, but she's not going to be here for 45 minutes, which is like a lifetime for children. So I sat down and I read Dear Bookstore, which was really fun for me since I know Emily Arrow and you know, there was Nina in the front row. It was very, very cute.
That's great, Emily. Yay for you for doing that.
I know. I had to, you know, it was a little nerve-wracking. You know, kids are a tough crowd. So, anyway, it was a lot of fun. I really recommend this book. It is a love story to bookstores. And also the woman who illustrated it, Genevieve Godbout, uses this imagery of like a bright neon yellow to show imagination. You know, how stories bring imagination into your life. Dear Bookstore, Emily Arrow. It was a fun morning and very unexpected.
That's great. I love that. Well, I'm currently in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I spent the night. And I came through this way to see the Carnegie Library, the big library here in downtown Pittsburgh. And it did not disappoint. This is a library that's been on my bucket list for probably decades, to be able to see this because it is huge. And it was Carnegie's gift to the city that made him a wealthy man. It has a performing arts space, lecture hall, of course, the library. There's a museum of natural history. There's I think an art museum too attached now. It is a whole city block long. It is a huge place. I had a really nice walk around in it yesterday, seeing some of the big rooms and then the different sections. And in the stacks, they still have the thick glass floors, you know, that let in a lot of light and where there's a little gap where you can see below and above you. Wonderful place. Yeah,
so
really.
cool.
I'm so glad I got there. And after that, I parked in one of Carnegie Mellon's lots, which is like right next door. And so I took a walk around the block and hit Caliban Bookshop, which is a used and rare shop, just like across the street and down the block from the library. And that was really cool. I had a nice browse and it was adorable. There was a dad with his daughter in there, and she must have been like maybe 7, probably, maybe 8, not really sure. Obviously old enough to read the books. They were in the literary criticism, drama, poetry section. And, you know, I heard her say daddy, so that's how I know it was her dad. And at one point she says to him, "What is it with you and Shakespeare?" Oh my God, it was great. So funny.
And what did he say? Or did you keep walking?
He kind of laughed, you know, And then I don't know what he said, but I don't really know that he said too much. That could be a running joke between them.
Yes.
I have no idea.
That's
but he was
great.
like seriously scanning the shelves and really doing a good look through because, this is the University of Pittsburgh is right there. There's also a Catholic university here. So there are a lot of academic-y type literary criticism and cultural criticism books there, a big section, but very well organized shop. I had a good browse.
That's so cute. You have to wonder if he drags her, to places all around looking for things like that. I can totally see it. I remember my parents dragging me to do certain things that they were passionate about, when I was a kid. But that's so cute.
I looked at a lot of railroad drawings with my dad when I was a kid.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah. It's so interesting, the Carnegie stuff. I mean, when I was in my schooling for philanthropy, we read a lot about those early industrialists and how they founded philanthropy or started, all these philanthropic missions, including for Carnegie, the libraries. And I think it's great. I mean, I love libraries, but he also, didn't always pay his people well. And he believed that by opening these libraries, they could further their lives and make their lives better, which I think is a wonderful idea. But I also think he could have paid them more money, too, so they could more easily make their lives better.
Oh, yeah. He was a union buster and he hired detectives to spy on his people and stuff. Yeah, he was pretty ruthless himself.
Yeah.
I mean, there are two really different sides to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But beautiful libraries. And I know organizations had to go through certain measures in order to get money and funding from him to build libraries, et cetera.
Right. He did great. And I mean, that library program, I've read about that and what would you say, the evolution of it? Because initially they just gave money. To towns. And then they realized these libraries are not getting built. They're not getting finished. They're languishing, or they get built and then they're empty. So they really developed the program and had different styles, different architectural plans people could choose from. And then there was a stipulation then that there had to be a commitment to supplying the ongoing care of the library
right
before that would it's a really important things that are now expected when you get a grant, you do have to have certain things set up and follow through. So I do think it was a great program. And one of the points that is made in the county library book that I'm reading is that Mr. Brumback came up with the idea of supporting the library ladies and their organization with building a library before Carnegie's program got started. So I was like,
interesting.
Ching,
Yes. Well, we also had two joint jaunts. One of them was before Chris left, and the other one was while she was away. So before Chris left, we had the great fortune to meet one of our listeners, Deanna, here in Guilford. She was doing a big New England tour. She lives in Virginia and had reached out to us and said, hey, can we meet? And so we did. We had a great time just talking about books. You know how easy that is for us, all of us book lovers to do, and life at our local coffee shop. And then Chris had to go, but I walked Deanna over to the Guilford Public Library because Deanna is a librarian and archivist, and really enjoyed the history room at the public library. So it was fun to walk her through that because we have one of those classic New England libraries in our town that's got the older part of the library with a modern edition on the back.
And she brought us gifts.
Oh my gosh, such nice gifts. We had to fight over them, Deanna. Not that you didn't bring plenty, but when you give people gifts, like books and cookies. We had a cougar cat fight.
Deanna went to the Mount, Edith Wharton's home in the Berkshires, and she got us lovely bags.
Yes.
And lark cookies. I chose the pistachio cherry flavored cookies that were delicious.
I had the rosemary. Oh my goodness. I did not want to share. So
I
delicious.
didn't. I waited until I was in my car.
Smart move. Yes, they got you through those miles and miles.
They did.
And Deanna brought two books. One is one of these beautiful, the Persephone books. It's called Midsummer Night in the Workhouse by Diana Athill. And it's a memoir. So thank you so much, Deanna. I cannot wait to start this. These books are so beautiful and they feel really nice in your hands. They've got a really nice smooth cover.
Yeah. And the book that I chose that Deanna brought for us is an Edith Wharton picture book, which I don't have with me. So I'm sorry, I don't know who authored, edited it, but I look forward to getting home and diving into that. Deanna, thank you so much. It was really great to meet you, and maybe we'll see you in Virginia one of these days.
Yes, we talked about that. There's some great bookish stuff to do. And it's not far from DC also. We could do a big combo visit. That would be fun. And we lived vicariously through you, by the way, Deanna, hearing all about your travels. She had a great New England trip.
Yes.
And then we had our monthly reading salon with a group of patrons. Thank you so much to everyone who came. We were talking about big books. Even if people aren't planning to officially participate in Sue's Big Book Summer Reading Challenge, we had decided last month that our subject this month would be books over 400 pages.
Yeah, just like what were some people's favorites or what they're thinking about reading soon. So it was really nice to get a list of books added to my TBR, and then oohing and ahhing over ones that I have loved and enjoyed.
Yes.
That people were talking about. I think one of the big ones that a lot of people gave thumbs up to was Beach Music by Pat Conroy. Was one that came up because Sue mentioned she's going to be reading his novel, The Prince of Tides.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sue came with a very big stack, which makes sense as the host.
Yeah,
and she also talks about big book audiobooks also. One of the ones you talked about, was it The Power Broker? It's like 40-hour audiobook or something.
Yeah. I think it was more like 60 hours.
Oh, wow.
The Power Broker, because that book is over 1,000 pages. Yeah, The Power Broker, it's 1,246 pages or 66 hours and 7 minutes.
Wow.
I cannot commit to that as an audiobook.
Yeah. I would do a hybrid though, for sure. I mean, I do that with a lot of my over 400. I do that with a lot of my books in general now. I really enjoy it. Particularly if I'm having like a day where I'm not going to have much reading time, but I have a lot of driving time. It makes me so much less crabby if I get an hour of audiobook listening while I drive all over.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Chris, how about upcoming jaunts once you get home?
Well, I get home on Wednesday, which is today. Later today, I'll get home. And then on Monday, I hop on a plane to Nebraska for the 70th annual Willa-Cather Spring Conference in Red Cloud. But before that, Colleen and I are meeting in Omaha. She's a regular listener who's been a guest on our podcast several times. We're meeting in Omaha and then hopping in the car and driving to Abilene, Kansas first, where we're going to visit the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then the conference starts a couple days later. So it'll be nice to have a few days to just hang out and drive around and see things. I think it's Colleen's first visit to Nebraska/Kansas. So it'll be fun to drive around and see it fresh through somebody else's eyes.
And Colleen's doing her year of reading Willa-Cather. So how fun for her to be able to go to the conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And we had our conversation about her World War I novel, One of Ours, just since the last episode. That was a really good conversation. And then the next book coming up is The Professor's House by Cather, which is published in 1925. We're reading them a tad bit out of order just to get The Professor's House in, because that is the kind of like focus book of the conference since it was published 100 years ago this year.
Perfect. Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I guess while you're away, I'm going to be going and meeting my son and daughter-in-law and grandson in Princeton, New Jersey. They're coming for a wedding. So I wanted to crowdsource. I mean, I've been asked to be on Grammy duty while they're at the wedding. So I'm not sure how much, playtime I'm going to have. But I did want to crowdsource with anyone who knows the Princeton, New Jersey area, if there is a bookstore or library or someplace I should go. I haven't had a chance to research. Please shout out on social media or send us an email. So I'll be doing that.
Yeah, you definitely walk around campus around Princeton. I mean, I know there are some bookstores, obviously, it's around a campus like that. Right. The campus is really beautiful. My niece had been there for a while, and she was saying that like they have brown squirrels and black squirrels. So keep your eye out for squirrels. Squirrels and books.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, even if I could just get to the campus library, I would love that. Yeah, so that's coming up for me. And then when we're both back, we have just a plan for a fun day together. We haven't quite decided what we're going to do. We do have these, the Connecticut book trail passports that we picked up on Independent Bookstore Day. Chris took the map in the front and made it into quadrants of ways that we could tackle these bookstores. Like in a day, we could get to 4 or 5 of them. So maybe we'll tackle a quadrant on on that day. Who knows? We'll see how the winds blow. Is that what you say?
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, and that could be a literal thing, depending on if the weather is
exactly. Yes. Do you have any upcoming reads?
I do. I'm going to be starting my first big book. Now, that Fever in the Heartland is technically a big book, but I read it prior to the beginning of Big Book Summer, so I won't be including that. But my first big book that I'll be reading is The Weight of Ink by Rachel Kadish. This one is 704 pages, and I purchased it last summer at the Yiddish Book Center up in Amherst, Massachusetts. So I'm really looking forward to getting that. I saw it recommended to people who really enjoy Geraldine Brooks's People of the Book, which I read in the last year or two and really love that. And so people have said, if you like that book, you're going to love The Weight of Ink. A very similar theme.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have a book queued up for your drive home?
Well, I'm going to continue listening to Still Writing by Dani Shapiro. That is the one I'll be listening to on the way home. I don't remember how much I have to go. I have listened to a couple podcasts and stuff too.
Yeah.
So I plan on finishing that. I did download the audio version of The Professor's House. I haven't listened to one before because I didn't want somebody else's voice in my head when I'm reading it, But The Professor's House, this book that I have here, it's narrated by Sean Runette. And I really liked his voice. So I do have that queued up. It's 6 hours and 9 minutes. So it's not a big book. And I don't know that I'll listen to a big book because I have the paperback of The Weight of Ink. And I know this will mean dragging this 700 plus page book on the airplane, but I think I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Why not? Just make sure you have a rolly bag because goodness knows you'll probably come home with some books. Well, I have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier queued up as my next big book summer read after I finish The Emperor of Gladness. I am going to do a buddy read of this. This is on our ghost story bingo card for our year of reading ghost stories. So we'll put a link in the show notes to the Goodreads buddy read thread. That is hard to say. Which just means, we're not going to do official Zoom conversation about it or anything. But if you do want to read that book and read along with me, please do join me there. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't thought about an audiobook version yet, but I might look that up. And then another thing I want to crowdsource, which I did crowdsource at the reading salon, was a Kristen Hanna book. The only book of hers I've read is The Women, which I really loved. And so I did some of my own research because she's very prolific. And I decided to read Four Winds. And when my gentleman caller went to pick it up at the librarian was hugging it before she handed it to him and said, "This is the saddest book I've ever read." Like the saddest book I've ever read. And so I don't know if I should read it. A lot of the people on the reading salon had read it and said they concurred and recommended that I read something else. I think the recommendation I walked away with was The Nightingale.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people said, if you want to have a sad summer, of course, read it. But
yeah, it's about the Great Depression. It's compared to The Grapes of Wrath, Four Winds is. So I'd love to hear from people who have read Kristen Hanna. And if there's one of hers you think I should read next, please let me know. And then in the Out Now category, The Ghostwriter by Julie Clark. I really enjoyed this book. Highly recommend. It's a page turner. It's not over 400 pages, but it would be a great summer read.
Nice. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for listening. We always love to hear about what you're reading. So, drop us an email, bookcougars@gmail.com, or reach out on social media. Let us know what you're reading.
We wish you all
lots of happy reading. Thanks for listening to the Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.